I'm Shaylee. Today I'm going to be teaching you lesson number 1 of 3 for learning to foundation paper piece. I have a Quilt Along for a Cause coming up after the first of the year, and I would love it if some of you who maybe are a little rusty or do not know what you're doing when it comes to foundation paper piecing were able to build enough skills to join us. Lesson number 1 is basic. We're doing one single section. A lot of foundation paper piecing comes in more than one section that you're gonna assemble together at the end. We're doing just one section to start with. These are for flying geese. It's a very simple block. Once you have printed your pattern, and don't forget you need to print this at 100%. Go to print it, just click to actual size or 100%. And once it's printed, you can see I add 1-inch test squares to my newer patterns. And you can just line it up real quick and make sure it's good to go. This one printed at the right size, it's ready. You'll notice that it comes completely blank. So you could use coloring pencils, and for complicated patterns, I often will use coloring pencils. Today, I'm just gonna write on it with a pen. Let's see, I want my flying geese to be yellow, 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 yellow. And then I would like this side to be green and this side to be my paisley. So when we paper piece, you're going to want a handful of different tools. You're going to need a ruler. I would recommend going with one of your slimmer rulers just because it's easy to maneuver when you have this much going on in one area. You're going to want a cutting mat, rotary cutter, pair of scissors. I like to use Elmer's washable school glue. You'll see today this is how I paper piece. It may or may not be the technically correct way. You may find a way that works better for you. Today is just me showing you all of the different things that I've kind of picked up and put together. You'll also want an iron and an ironing mat. A very important part of paper piecing is making sure that you shrink your stitch length. We do this because it helps keep everything from shifting as easily, and it also makes it so that the paper tears out a lot easier. I like to go 1.3 to 1.7, somewhere in that range. 1.5 is a good happy place. Check with your seam ripper and see how small you can go, but still seam rip if something goes wrong. So when we foundation paper piece, one of the things that's kind of hard to wrap your head around once we get going, it'll make sense once we get going, but we are sewing on the back side of the fabric. This side is going to be nice and pretty. There will be no seams on this side. The back side of your paper is the front side of your fabric, and the front side of your paper is the back side of your fabric. Quick reminder, cut out the section that you're working with because it does make it a lot easier. I forgot until I was a little ways in, so you'll suddenly see it switch back. I am a little wasteful when it comes to fabric. Some will go through and cut out each individual section, leaving exactly a 1/4 inch seam. I don't like to do that. I think it slows me down. I'd rather throw a little bit of fabric in the trash and get through a project because that's just how I am. That's my personality. You can do what you want to. So when we go to cut a section of fabric out, we need to make sure that the fabric is going to be at least a 1/4 inch overhang on every single side of this one piece. So we're working on A1, so we need to make sure that the fabric overhangs all the way over to here. So what I do is I just lay my paper down, I fold it back to make sure that you can see a little bit on that side, I fold it back to make sure you can see a little more than a 1/4 inch on that side, and then I carefully, without cutting myself, just cut a slightly too wide strip of fabric. Then I will come along here. I'll lay it down, make sure it overhangs. You can tell this is, you can kind of see through this. That's one of the reasons I picked this particular fabric. All right, so overhang a little more than a 1/4 inch on the left side, overhang a little more than a 1/4 inch on the right side, and cut it. Your first piece of fabric, your first section, is oftentimes the easiest to get lined up exactly how you want it. So what you're going to do, if you're glue basting like I am, make sure you're using washable school glue, otherwise it won't rinse out with a little bit of water. Washable is very important. Add just a teeny tiny little dot of glue in all the corners, and then take your fabric right side down, so the ugly side's facing you. You're going to glue the paper to the ugly side of the fabric. Alright, and then take a hot iron and set it over top to make sure that that glue dries real fast and you don't have to worry about it again. Alright, so now pick it up and it doesn't fall off. That was one of the problems I had when I first started trying to paper piece. By the time I got to my sewing machine, everything had completely shifted and just was a pain. So, section 2 is a paisley. Now, once we get past the first section, what we're going to do is we're going to look at this line. This is the line we're about to sew. Fold the line, fold along the line, like this. This is the back side of A2 now. So when we sew this together, what happens to make sure that the seams are still facing towards this side of the paper, you're going to put your fabric on the wrong way, and it's going to flip over so the seam gets sandwiched between the fabric and the paper. Sounds complicated, I promise it's super easy. So take your paper, you'll want to make sure that it is at least 1/4 inch on all sides and 1/4 inch overhang on this side. Like I said, I tend to be a little wasteful, go a little big, go as is. Alright. So, you want at least 1/4 inch overhang on this side. You can cut it off to make it a little easier on yourself. Put this like this. Use your fingernail on the one corner to double check to make sure that there's at least 1/4 inch overhang on either side. Slide on over. I use a finger to hold all of the layers in place. I take my other finger, I slide it up underneath the fold to hold it from the underside, and then I unwrap. Bring it on under. When you're on the inside and you're at an intersecting block, I like to take 1 stitch past that intersecting block. So part of the advantage of folding is now you have a nice pretty line to sew down. When you're sewing through the 1/4 inch seam allowance, you'll want to sew through the whole thing. Once we're back from the sewing machine, we take the iron, set it on top to set the stitches we just made. Then we will fold along the same line that we just sewed, set it onto your cutting mat, and line up the edge of the paper so that you have 1/4 inch hanging off. So you're going to trim the fabric 1/4 inch away from the paper. Then I take it back to my ironing mat, add a few drops of washable school glue, and gently pull the fabric over the new seam and where the glue is,
And you don't want to pull real hard because you could have a bias edge and you don't want to stretch your fabric out. And then I will use a nice hot iron to set the glue so that that new seam stays perfectly in place.
So we'll go to the other side, to A3, and we will repeat this process. You fold. You take your fabric in.
Keep that pretty side facing towards you, wrong side of the fabric towards the mat.
Making sure you have at least a 1/4 inch seam on every side. Without cutting yourself. Cut like that. Now this one, I'm going to show you what it is that I actually normally do. I don't even cut off the excess. I just take the whole thing on over here. So then I go 1 stitch past the intersection, and I sew straight through the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Take it back over here. Put this down. Put it here. Cut. Sometimes these can be reused, sometimes they can't, depending on the pattern. I have kind of started saving a lot of the smaller ones just to reuse them. Alright, a little bit of glue. Get that hair out of the way. It really likes me today. Alright, a little bit of glue, get the hair out of the way. Then I will gently iron that down. Alright, so now we're back to a yellow. So I'll go back over here where I had a yellow piece cut. And I'll make sure that it hangs off at least a 1/4 inch across the top, at least a 1/4 inch on the bottom, and a 1/4 inch on either side. Pretty side facing away from you is the very first one. If I can't see the pretty fabric, that's my clue before I start sewing that I'm about to sew it on backwards. So fold, check for your pretty fabric. All right, so I go 1 stitch before the intersection. I like to hold the strings across the line if I have any strings. I don't know if it makes that much of a difference. It makes me feel a little bit better, like I've secured it. Alright, stitch straight down that line. Go 1 stitch past and then cut. Bring it on back over. Iron it down. Alright, then you fold back along the same line that you did when you cut it. Cut off exactly 1/4 inch seam. You know the one, the favorite quilter seam. And then you add a little bit of glue. And fold it open. Touch up with the hot iron. And that's really all it is for the majority of paper piecing. Once you make sure your first piece is on correctly, you sew on the line that separates the piece you're on to the next number, making sure that
Any number past 1, the fabric is facing towards you while your paper is folded. I'm going to start showing you me sewing in a faster speed so that this video doesn't last forever. Well, I've got you here. I'm going to go ahead and go over a couple of common questions. First one, what kind of paper should I be using to print my patterns? I personally just use regular printer paper. There are lots of options out there. However, I just find the regular printer paper to be most in my budget. And as you can see, as someone whose quilting room is the garage that I was exiled out to because I was taking over the kitchen table too many times, my quilting budget is not as immense as some others. Although my exiled garage is not as pretty as some of the sewing rooms that I'm envious of, I do have a table large enough to be able to have all of my tools set up side by side. And being able to go directly from your ironing mat to your cutting mat to your sewing machine makes a huge difference in how long it takes you to paper piece. Now, sometimes when you've sewn through the 1/4 inch seam allowance, you end up struggling to fold. What I do is I very carefully tear back to the line and then fold that way. Alright, so green fabric, green fabric. The last common question that I see for beginner paper piecers is, when do I remove the paper? What I say is, don't remove the paper unless you need to, or it's been sewn in on all 4 sides to another block. I will cover this a little bit more in one of my future lessons because I do kind of break that very common foundation paper piecer rule when I am piecing for myself. Now the other thing that I like to do is add just a little dollop of glue in the corners. This is less important when you're not pinning sections together. However, it does make it stay nice and flat and perfect. Alright, now the last step is to square it up. Alright, just a reminder, this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This dark line is actually the section so the last thing you want to do is cut right along the black line, because then you have to start all over or your block is all going to be wonky. Alright, so laying your 1/4 inch ruler mark up along the solid black line and slice. It comes out to be pretty dang accurate with the dotted line. However, I wouldn't always trust it, especially if you've decided to scale your project. If you're printing not at 100%, you're going to have to not rely on those 1/4 inch seam allowances because they will no longer be 1/4 inch. And there you have it, your first foundation paper piece block.